Hi everyone, in this session I'm going to talk about retention labels in Microsoft 365 and some of the key configurations that you should consider when deploying retention labels to SharePoint and other Microsoft 365 applications. Okay, let's start. So retention label has three key components. First, actions that you want your retention labels to perform when they're applied to files. Controls, how the files and information should be managed when retention labels are applied, and file plan, which provides an organizational and legal description to your file plan and also an inventory of where the file plans are deployed, SharePoint, Teams, etc. Let's look at actions first. First action option is retain only. In this option, the information is retained for the duration of the retention period that is applied to retention label, but at the end of the retention period, no action is taken. So the file remains in place and is not deleted. Retain and delete performs exactly the same, but at the end of the retention period, you have an option to delete the file, either manually or automatically. Delete only. In this mode, a retention label acts more as a delete label or a delete policy. So you can apply a deletion, a retention label. It does not attempt to retain the file, but it checks based on the criteria when the file is ready for disposition and it goes ahead and deletes the file. Now let's look at controls. The first control is the most important one, is the period, how long you want to keep the information for. That determines the actions or the controls during the actions when they are applied. Trigger. On what basis are you going to determine the retention period when the label is applied on a file? There you have two options. You can either calculate your retention period based on a date. Now this could be created date, modified date, or in fact the date when the label is applied. Or an event. This could be an external event, for example, employee leaving the company. On that basis, the event is triggered either manually or Microsoft 365 now provides automated integration with line of business applications, and that determines when the information should be disposed. Disposition. What type of disposition do you want to associate with the retention label when the file comes to the end of its retention period? And there you can have an automated deletion or disposition, which means that the file will be automatically disposed and no manual intervention required. Or you can configure a manual disposition workflow, which means that at the end of the retention period, the system will trigger a workflow. You can configure who should be notified, is a person within your organization, and then they have a number of options available as part of the disposition workflow, and they can retain the file, they can extend the retention period, or they can decide to delete the file. Now the most important configuration is record. A retention label does not apply record management controls unless it's configured to do so. So remember to check that box when you're configuring retention label. That provides immutability controls to your files when a retention label with a record management functionality is applied to a file. It's really important. Second and final one is regulatory record. This is a new variation of a record configuration. It's not available publicly right now, but is on Microsoft roadmap, and is really for those organizations where they want to demonstrate immutability in content, metadata, and enforce that immutability that nobody can delete or tamper with that file. Whereas with the record configuration, there are certain access permission levels through which you can remove the label, but with regulatory record, nobody in the system would be able to remove the record label. Now let's look at file plan. A file plan provides a name, description, and organizational context. So you have the common descriptors such as name and description. For description, you have two types of descriptions. First is the admin, and then the description for the users. The description for users is really important because once configured correctly and centrally, it provides a very easy way for users to understand the purpose and the guidance associated with that retention label. You can include examples, You can include scenarios in which the users can apply the retention label, and that description appears, for example, when the users in SharePoint are about to apply a retention label to a file. So very handy tool. File plan descriptors. There you have a bunch of properties available that you can assign to a retention label. Very handy for record managers and administrators when they look at retention label and they are able to see that in context of the organization or a legal citation or a legal or a regulatory authority from where the retention label requirement is driven. Very useful to understand and document in one single place everything that you need to from an end user point of view, from an administration, and from a legal and compliance point of view. And then finally, label policy, which packages your labels together into a deployable format so that you can deploy them and make them available and apply to files within Microsoft 365 applications. And there you have SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Exchange Online, and Teams. And that workload description is expanding as Microsoft is looking to integrate more and more retention label capability with other Microsoft 365 applications. So that, in a nutshell, is a description of retention label and the key configuration that you should be mindful of. I hope you find it useful. Thank you.